Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1975 controversial hybrid of animation and live action that is Coonskin. Now, Coonskin is a film that I was aware of because I'm a fan of Ralph Bakshi. I like a lot of his films. He's honestly one of my favorite animators. So, because of that, I was definitely intrigued by Coonskin, but due to the subject matter of the film, it was a movie that I just really didn't want to watch anytime soon. It's that kind of thing. Because of the fact that, from what I read, it was pretty intense. It was a dark film. It dealt with a lot of heavy themes and a lot of stuff that I just really wasn't in the mood for. But after finally deciding to give it a shot, I wound up liking it. Now, I'm not going to say that I loved the movie. I think as a film, it's a little too scattered when it comes to its narrative or lack thereof. But as a work of art, it's honestly one of the most daring, brash, and thought-provoking works of animation that I've seen in a long time. It's a film that was very controversial in 1975, and considering how things are today when it comes to political correctness and the way that people look at a lot of the themes and a lot of the elements that are featured in this film, this is an even more controversial and edgy film now to watch, but I still feel it's an important one because of the fact that it was so ahead of its time in terms of being willing to open up discussions about how outrageous and how absurd and how hurtful stereotypes of all kinds are. Now, before I get around to sharing more of my thoughts on the film, I want to give a special shout out to Harvey for requesting this review. And if there is another film, TV show, or topic that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to either my PayPal, my Patreon, or my Cash App. The links to all three are in the video description down below, and I will try to get to your requests as soon as I possibly can. Now, Coonskin is directed by Ralph Bakshi. I believe this is his follow up to Heavy Traffic. I think he did that prior to this. And the producer of Coonskin, I believe, produced Heavy Traffic. And Ralph decided he wanted to make a movie about African American stereotypes and just stereotypes in general, in terms of just the caricatures that existed throughout history and through art and through animation. He decided to continue with his very groundbreaking, very subversive style of animation for Coonskin. And he even decided to go out of his way to hire as many black animators as he could to work on this movie, which for the time, that was something that was relatively unheard of because black animators were rarely ever hired for these kind of projects. But Ralph felt like he wanted to give back to the African American community, and this was one of the ways he was able to do that. Ralph's direction in this is as dynamic and as strong as any of his other films. This movie actually features some of his most impressive visuals in terms of just the way that he frames the animation and just the animation in general. Like, there's some really messed up, twisted sequences in this, but there are a lot of moments in this though that are just very striking and memorable in terms of their rawness and just how uh vicious or violent or intense the imagery can be at points. And sometimes the intensity is not just directed to violence, it's directed to the intensity of certain themes or certain aspects of the subtext involving the film. And not only that, Ralph also directed a lot of live action sequences in it. And I think the live action scenes definitely feature some of his best work in that regard. There's some really nice looking shots when it comes to the live action sequences. There's one scene in particular in a subway with a bunch of sad clowns uh, playing violins next to a coffin, and that is a really nice looking shot. And the way that he juxtaposed animation with live actors is something that was very ahead of its time. I mean, this he was doing stuff like this prior to something like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, you know. And Who Framed Roger Rabbit wasn't the only one either, because Song of the South did a lot of that. And that's a big part of why this is a hybrid film, because of the fact that this is in many ways a satire of the Brer Rabbit stories that were adapted for Song of the South. And a lot of the decisions by Ralph regarding this film are very deliberate, very calculated, and I could see how somebody could look at this movie and not understand the context of what Ralph was trying to say and see it as some kind of racially offensive movie because of the style of animation, because of the racial caricatures that are utilized quite frequently throughout the movie. But if you know the context of what Ralph was trying to say with this film, it actually is one of the most effective films that I've seen when it comes to really exposing the absurdity of stereotypes in general, and how if you take away their power, they're really not as effective. You show how ridiculous they are, you show how over the top they are in every possible regard. It makes it so they lose their power, they lose their integrity, because now people can see them for the foolish absurdities that they actually are. And Ralph is the kind of person who was willing to go as far as he possibly could and as far as he needed to in terms of really getting that across with this film. And I don't think any other director, any other animator at this time or even now would have had the guts to go as far as he did with this, to be as brash, to be as daring, to be as um, controversial and subversive. And there are some moments animation wise that are actually quite beautiful if you can look at them and see beyond the ugliness or beyond the stereotypes. There are some moments when it comes to the animation that are actually really well done, really well animated, really well put together. And Bakshi is still at the top of his game here in terms of his framing for the animation, the way the camera work is utilized in terms of the movement, and the way each animated sequence transitions from one to the next, and also how he handles the live action segments and directs those, and still has that same energy, that same wild madcap frenzied energy that he utilized for the animation. It's still very much prevalent in the live action segments. So yeah, Ralph Bakshi's direction in this is great. Now, Coonskin is also written by Ralph Bakshi. And Ralph Bakshi, at this time and throughout his whole career, he was known as the kind of writer who was willing to go to places that not many other writers were willing to go. He was willing to cross lines and cross boundaries and make some very subversive and quite controversial uh, stories and screenplays. And Coonskin is definitely one of those. You could argue in some ways it might be his most controversial. And I think in a lot of ways, this is a screenplay that represents the best aspects of Coonskin, but also the worst aspects of Coonskin. And what I mean by the best is just the way that he handles the stereotypes in general. It's very clever, it's very smart, and it's the kind of thing where because of how far he's willing to take it, how far he exaggerates these stereotypes, whether it's racial stereotypes, whether it's stereotypes about sexuality, whether it's stereotypes about gender, he creates a screenplay where nothing is sacred, nothing is off limits, and he's just able to target all these different things at once, but still in a way that feels very pointed. And I think that is something that is a lot more difficult than people might think. That being said, I can see how some people might interpret some of the attempts to be a bit too broad, but I also believe that is by intent because by being this broad, it shows uh, ridiculous and uh, how genuinely dumb these stereotypes are. You be as broad as possible and you show the reality of these stereotypes, and you're not showing the perceived reality of them or what certain people who abide by these stereotypes want you to think and want you to feel about them. And another thing about a script that I think he does a really great job with in terms of the satire is the satirization of the mafia, which is something that wasn't as common then and isn't as common nowadays unless you're talking about like a parody movie of like mob films, because Ralph was not happy at all with the glamorization of the mob and the mafia after the release of The Godfather. He saw how people's mindsets on the mafia and the mob shifted into this more positive thing where they glamorize these mob bosses. And so he decided to turn that on its head. He made this whole mob story uh, a cartoon that is this very stylized take on the Brer Rabbit cartoons that were actually featured in the film Song of the South, which is kind of ironic when you think about it, that Song of the South is an inspiration for this movie. And Song of the South is this film that Disney has just straight up disowned. And it's a film that's been buried by so many because of its controversial nature. But it's nothing compared to Coonskin. Like Coonskin is 10 times, 100 times more controversial. I mean, Song of the South, it seems tame in comparison. And so Ralph takes these Brer Rabbit stories and he puts a bit of a black exploitation spin on them, and changes the characters into Brother Rabbit and Preacher Fox and Brother Bear, and they are all on this journey together to rise up the ranks through the Harlem gangs and become uh, their own kingpins of Harlem. So it's a cartoon stylized tale of these black animals, these animals that are definitely intended to be black men, black gangsters, who then have their own rise to power. And along the way, they encounter different obstacles. There's this savior who is anything but, who's actually just trying to use religion to control other African Americans, other blacks. And the guy actually works for the white man. And there's this dirty cop, this corrupt white cop who's just going around making things hard for the black community, for Brother Rabbit and Preacher Fox and Brother Bear and all the other blacks. And Brother Rabbit finds a way to get back at him and takes him out. The mafia then gets involved because now Brother Rabbit's encroaching on their territory. And so then it becomes another element of that satire of the mob and the mafia story, where you had the blaxploitation spin on it, and now it just becomes this very broad satire of the mob in general. The Godfather is this just really gross, misshapen slug of a man with man boobs and warts, and he's just disgusting to look at. And it shows the mob boss as the disgusting piece of slime that he is, not this stylized, glamorized version of this mob boss that Hollywood has been providing to people for not only a couple years at the time of this film's release, but ever since, to be honest. And it really doesn't paint the mob in a way that is glamorized at all. In fact, the closest it gets to that is glamorizing the mom of the sons that are killed, specifically one son who tries to kill Brother Rabbit by dressing up as a stereotypical, exaggerated caricature of an old a black man, and he winds up getting killed, and the mother decides to get revenge, and she winds up getting shot in the process, and then turns into a young woman who then grows butterfly wings and then turns into a butterfly and flies away, and then the mob boss, the Godfather, squishes her. Which it's a beautiful bit of animation, but it's a nasty one too, if you think about it. And you have a lot of stuff where it talks about the corruption that the mob in particular has enabled or thrust upon the African American community. And it approaches that with this whole thing with Brother Bear, where he's now being bought by the mob to be a boxer and become this champion and make all this money, but it's all really for the mob, which is based on a true story. That's what happened with I believe it was uh, uh, I think it was Joe Louis. So you had this former, you know, African American, boxer, this man who was, well, I wouldn't say former, he was still boxing at the time, but he was this man who was really successful in his sport, and I think he was even a champion at one point, and then got into some tough times, and the mob came in and took advantage of him, and then he became bought by the mob. And so the stuff with the Brother Bear is a correlation to that. And then by the end of it, Brother Rabbit outsmarts the mob, actually winds up tricking them into thinking that they're going to stab him at the big fight, but he puts up a tar version of himself. And so they wind up getting enveloped in tar and then blown up in, rather Looney Tunes cartoon fashion by Brother Rabbit by the end of the animated arc, the animated story. And in between a lot of the stuff going on with the mob and with Brother Rabbit and his gang, there's some other stuff involving this beautiful, buxom, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, white woman wearing a American flag, essentially, and she's called Miss America. And Bakshi makes sure to show her just taking advantage of every black man that she sees, making him think that, oh, he's got a chance with her, but then she'll like punch him in the face, or oh, you're gonna go down on me, and then I'm gonna essentially shoot you with my pussy, and then say something like, I think there was like a reference to the clap, which was actually a really funny joke, and it's absurd. It's surreal, but it definitely makes you think in a lot of ways. And I can see how some people could look at that and be like, "Well, isn't that a little bit one-sided?" And I'm like, "It's not really though. It's pointing out the ugliness and the absurdity of all types of stereotypes. So I don't think that Ralph intended those scenes to just be, oh, this is exactly how I feel about how every black person is being treated in America and in society in general, and that America just dicks them around and gives them blue balls. Like, I don't really think that that's entirely what he was thinking. But also, I'm not entirely sure. And that ties into one of the issues I do have with this script is that, as pointed as the satire can be, at points it really doesn't necessarily, I just don't think it gels as well. Like, it's one of those things where I see what Ralph is trying to do, but it's not really coming across as clear as I think he might have wanted it to. And not only that, the plot is not very good. It's mostly just bunch of random stuff involving Brother Rabbit and his crew, the random adventures of them trying to rise up the ranks in Harlem, and then them winding up fighting the mob. And that's really all that the plot is. And I think the conflict involving Brother Rabbit trying to make it big and him trying to rise up the ranks and have his own mob is not really that compelling, and neither is the whole conflict between him and the mob. So it's just one of those things where it's semi compelling. There's a little bit of conflict, but it's not really the kind of conflict that really sticks with you. And on top of that, the characters aren't really that strong, but I think that might have also been by design to just further emphasize how broad these stereotypes are and how hyper stylized they are and how over the top they are and how you shouldn't take them seriously at all. And that works in some capacity, but I think if things were balanced out more with a more compelling live action plot, the couple with the animation, then I think that would have been something that would have worked better for me. Because the live action stuff isn't really that great either. It's even more thin. It just seems like it's really nothing more than a glorified bookend to the animation. The story of Pappy and Preacher Man and Randy and Samson, and Preacher Man and Samson going to try to uh, pick up Randy and Pappy after they break out of prison, and the story of Brother Rabbit is a story that is told by Pappy to Randy while they're waiting for their getaway car. And the end of the film is Pappy and Randy escaping from prison and getting picked up by Preacher Man and Samson, and they drive off, and then that's the end of the overall script and the narrative as a whole. And I don't know, it just seems like a little scattered, a little unfocused, and just not really quite as strong as it could be. The dialogue also at points isn't as strong. There are some moments where I think the dialogue is just really nothing more than just an extension of the broad stereotypes, and I think at points that works in its favor, but in other ways it can be a little too much, and it can also add to the film just becoming a little too hard to follow, or difficult to stomach for some people, because of some of the subject matter and some of the things that are being discussed, or just the repetitiveness of some things, and the repetitiveness at points definitely can also hurt the movie, because then it and the story, because in the dialogue, because then it just kind of gets to the point where you get desensitized to it in some ways. And maybe a less is more approach might have been a little bit more effective, possibly, or maybe work a little bit more on making the dialogue have some satire and some lines that are more witty, more clever, more humorous than just straight up controversial or brash when it comes to the dialogue. But it's a screenplay at the end of the day that I still appreciate because of the dialogue that's opened up, because of the fact that Ralph was willing to go as far as he went with it. So I think, even though I feel the script could be better, I still feel that it's a decent screenplay, just for the fact that it's such a genuinely powerful script in a lot of ways, because of the way that it just exposes these broad generalized stereotypes and all of their forms. Now, the cast is also, in my opinion, a pretty big highlight for this film. You have Philip Michael Thomas before Miami Vice playing Randy, but he also voices Brother Rabbit. You have Barry White, the singer, who voices Samson and Brother Bear, but doesn't sing. You would think, oh, it's Barry White, so he's going to have a song on the soundtrack. He doesn't, which is one of the more surprising things about the film, if you really think about it. You have Charles Gordone as Preacher Man, who also voices Preacher Fox. You have Scatman Crothers, who voices Pappy, and Old Man Bone, Simple Savior, and another character too, because he also voices a minstrel character. You also have Al Lewis, Grandpa Munster from the Munsters. He's in this. He voices the Godfather. The stereotype, the satire of the mob boss. That's him. That's Grandpa Munster, and he does such a good job. He's completely unrecognizable. So the cast is mostly compromised, though, of Philip Michael Thomas, Barry White, Charles Gordone, and Scatman Crothers. And all four of them do some really inspired, really, in my opinion, incredible work, because they do a good job with the live action scenes that they have, even though there's not a lot of, let's just say, depth to those scenes, but it's still some good performances by the actors in those sequences. And then when it comes to the animation, they really do a good job bringing their characters to life when it comes to the animated sequences, and they have a good rapport with one another. And a big part of why this film works is because of the quality of the cast. Like, it has some genuinely good performances by everybody involved when it comes to the voiceover work in particular. And you also have some good music too, especially from Scatman Crothers. Scatman Crothers sings a song in the opening credits of this film, and it's a song I can't really repeat the name of, and I can't really repeat most of the lyrics. Let's just say it features the N word quite often and uh, throughout the song, but it's a really soulful, really nice blues song, like bluegrass sort of song that Scatman sings, and does a good job really setting the tone for the film. And it's just a good song overall. And Scatman is, I mean, that was really what he was known for before he started acting. He wasn't always an actor. He was a singer, he was a performer. And so it's cool to see him be able to showcase that in this movie and for it to be preserved the way that it is with an authentic performance by him that opens up the film. And it does have some cinematography by William A. Fraker, and it's effective. It works well for what the film is trying to do. A lot of it though is just in the live action scenes, and they're honestly garish at points and almost quite to the point where they can be considered to be almost nightmarish and almost like it's an acid trip, but that's the whole point of it, and it just meshes so well with the animation. And I definitely have to give the cinematographer some credit for that as well, because his vision visually blended well with what Ralph was trying to do with these live action sequences. The editing by Donald W. Ernst, I think, is a very earnest, very solid job by him. And the music by Chico Hamilton is fine, but a lot of the more memorable music is the song by Scatman and some of the other licensed music that they used at some points throughout the film. And it's not too long of a film. It's only an hour and 20 something minutes, but it kind of drags a little bit, I have to be honest, because of the fact that the plot isn't the most compelling, like I said. And when it's not shocking you or unnerving you or being subversive with the social commentary and its style of animation and some of the graphic violence that's featured in it and the nudity and so on and so forth, it can get a little dull because of, the paper thin characters and the kind of weak plot. But I still feel it draws you in decently enough, at least for one viewing. And I definitely feel the film deserved better when it came out. It was very misunderstood upon its initial release. Because of the controversial subject matter and the animation and the chosen style that Ralph chose to animate the black characters and other characters in it, uh, it was effectively disowned by Paramount after he finished the film. So the movie had to be distributed by somebody else, but that was something that was still a really absurdly controversial event because there was this um, group called Core, which was at the time headed by Al Sharpton, and they saw, I think, footage from this or the trailer or the poster and deemed it to be racist. And they went as far to not only try to boycott the movie, but they smoke bombed a theater that was playing this film. So the movie never stood a chance because it got dropped by the studio. This other independent label picked it up, tried to release it, but then theaters showing it were getting bombed. But over the years, it's gotten some newfound critical appreciation. People have pointed out, at least to them, that it's their personal pick for Ralph's best work. Apparently, it's Ralph's favorite film of his. And I can see why some people might look at it as his best in terms of the biting satire and the fierceness of it. But as an overall film, no, I don't agree with that. But it does have some of his most striking imagery as a filmmaker and as an artist. I'm glad that I did get the courage to stomach this and actually, sit through it and allow myself to see this film for what it is and not for what it might appear on the surface. Because if you just look at some of the animation stills, and even if you look at the trailer, you're not necessarily going to really get the full context of what this film is and what it's trying to say. And this is a film that I think at the time got a lot of knee jerk reactions, and I think today is still going to get a lot of knee jerk reactions because of those things. But if you can get past that and just see this as the biting satire that it's genuinely trying to be, and appreciate it as this daring animated work of anarchy, I think there is a lot to at least value and appreciate about this film, even if it is something at the end of the day that doesn't ultimately wind up being your personal uh, um, preference.